Text 34. Yaya tu dharma kamatan dritya darayate arjuna rasangena palakankishi driti sapata rajasi. Translation. And that determination by which one holds fast to fruitive result in religion, economic development, and sense gratification is of the nature of passion, O Arjuna. Purport. Any person who is always desirous of fruitive results in religious or economic activities, whose only desire is sense gratification, and whose mind, life, and senses are thus engaged, is in the mode of passion. Text 35. Yaya svapnam bhayam shokam vishadam adam evacha na vimunjati dvameta vriti sapata tamasi. Translation. And that determination which cannot go beyond dreaming, fearfulness, lamentation, moroseness, and illusion, such unintelligent determination is in the mode of darkness. Purport. It should not be concluded that a person in the mode of goodness does not dream. Here dream means too much sleep. Dream is always present. Either in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance, dream is a natural occurrence. But those who cannot avoid oversleeping, who cannot avoid the pride of enjoying material objects, and who are always dreaming of lording it over the material world, whose life, mind, and senses are thus engaged, are considered to be in the mode of ignorance. Text 36 through 37. Sukham dividanim trividam srinu me parata rishabha abhyasa ramate yatra dukhantam cha nigachati yatad agre visham eva pariname mritopamam tatsukam satvikam proktam Atma Bodhi Prasadajam. Translation. O best of the Bhratas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. That which is the beginning may be just like poison, but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. Purport. A conditioned soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again, thus he chews the chewed, but sometimes in the course of such enjoyment he becomes relieved from material entanglement by association with a great soul. In other words, a conditioned soul is always engaged in some type of sense gratification, but when he understands by good association that it is only a repetition of the same thing, and he is awakened to his real Krishna consciousness, he is sometimes relieved from such repetitive so-called happiness. In the pursuit of self-realization, one has to follow many rules and regulations to control the mind and the senses and to concentrate the mind on the self. All these procedures are very difficult, bitter like poison, but if one is successful in following the regulations and comes to the transcendental position, he begins to drink real nectar and he enjoys life. Text 38. Vishayendriya samyoga yataragre mritopanam pariname visham eva tatsukam rajasam smritam. Translation. That happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects and which appears like nectar at first but poison at the end is said to be of the nature of passion. Purport. A young man and a young woman meet, and the senses drive the young man to see her, to touch her, and to have sexual intercourse. In the beginning, this may be very pleasing to the senses, but at the end, or after some time, it becomes just like poison. They are separated, or there is divorce, there is lamentation, there is sorrow, etc. Such happiness is always in the mode of passion. Happiness derived from a combination of the senses and the sense objects is always a cause of distress and should be avoided by all means. Text 39. Yaragre kanubande cha sukham mohanam atmana nidralasya pramadvatam tatamasam udavritam. Translation. And that happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. Purport. One who takes pleasure in laziness and in sleep is certainly in the mode of darkness, and one who has no idea how to act and how not to act is also in the mode of ignorance. For the person in the mode of ignorance, everything is illusion. There is no happiness either in the beginning or the end. For the person in the mode of passion, there might be some kind of ephemeral happiness in the beginning and at the end distress. But for the person in the mode of ignorance, there is only distress both in the beginning and at the end. Text 40. Natar asti pritivyam va devi deveshu vapuna sattvam prakriti jehi muktam yarevi siyatrivi guna. Translation. There is no being existing either here or among the demigods in the higher planetary systems, which is free from the three modes of material nature. Purport. The Lord here summarizes the total influence of the three modes of material nature all over the universe. Text 41. Brahmana Kshatra Visham Sudranam Cha Parantapa Kamani Pravibhaktani Svabhava Prabhave Gune. Translation. Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras are destined by their qualities of work, O chastiser of the enemy, in accordance with the modes of nature. Text 42. Shamo damastapa shocham kashanti ajavam evacha janam vijanam astikanyam brahmakama svabhavajam. Translation. Peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, wisdom, knowledge, and religiousness, these are the qualities by which the Brahmanas work. Text 43. Suryam teja driti dakshyam yote chapya palayanam danam ishvara bhavascha kshatram kama svabhavajam. Translation. Heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership are the qualities of work for the Kshatriyas. Text 44. Krishi karokishya vanijyam veshya karma svabhavajam paricharyatpakam karma shudrasyapi svabhavajam. Translation. Farming, cattle raising, and business are the qualities of work for the Vaishyas, and for the Shudras there is labor and service to others. Text 45. Sve sve kamanya virata samsiddhim labate naram svakama nirata siddhim yata vindati tachchu. Translation. By following his qualities of work, every man can become perfect. Now please hear from me how this can be done. Text 46. Yatta pravriti bhutanam yena savam idam tatam svakamanam abhyarichya siddhim vidanti manava. Translation. By worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all-pervading, man can, in the performance of his own duty, attain perfection. Purport. As stated in the 15th chapter, all living beings are fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. As such, the Supreme Lord is the beginning of all living entities. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadhyasya Yata. The Supreme Lord is therefore the beginning of life of every living entity, and the Supreme Lord, by his two energies, his external energy and internal energy, is all-pervading. Therefore, one should worship the Supreme Lord with his energies. Generally, the Vaishnava devotees worship the Supreme Lord with his internal energy. His external energy is a perverted reflection of the internal energy. The external energy is a background, but the Supreme Lord, by the expansion of his plenary portion as Paramatma, is situated everywhere. He is the supersoul of all demigods, all human beings, all animals, everywhere. One should therefore know that as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, it is his duty to render service unto the Supreme. Everyone should be engaged in devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness. That is recommended in this verse. Everyone should think that he is engaged in a particular type of occupation by Hirishkesha, the master of the senses, and by the result of the work in which one is engaged, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, should be worshipped. If one thinks always in this way, in full Krishna consciousness, then by the grace of the Lord he becomes fully aware of everything. That is the perfection of life. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Tesham aham samodarata. The Supreme Lord himself takes charge of delivering such a devotee. That is the highest perfection of life. In whatever occupation one may be engaged, if he serves the Supreme Lord, he will achieve the highest perfection. Text 47. Shriyan svadamo viguna paradharmat svanushtitat svabhavaniyatam karma kurvan apnoti ilvisham. Translation. It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Prescribed duties according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions. Purport. One's occupational duty is prescribed in Bhagavad Gita. As already discussed in previous verses, the duties of a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are prescribed according to the particular modes of nature. One should not imitate another's duty. A man who is by nature attracted to the kind of work done by Shudra should not artificially claim himself to be a Brahmana, although he may be born into a Brahmana family. In this way, one should work according to his own nature. No work is abominable if performed in the service of the Supreme Lord. The occupational duty of a Brahmana is certainly in the mode of goodness, but if a person is not by nature in the mode of goodness, he should not imitate the occupational duty of a Brahmana. For a Kshatriya or administrator, there are so many abominable things. Kshatriya has to be violent to kill his enemies, and sometimes a Kshatriya has to tell lies for the sake of diplomacy. Such violence and duplicity accompany political affairs, but a Kshatriya is not supposed to give up his occupational duty and try to perform the duties of a Brahmana. One should act to satisfy the Supreme Lord. For example, Arjuna was a Kshatriya. He was hesitating to fight the other party. But if such fighting is performed for the sake of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there need be no fear of degradation. In the business field also, sometimes a merchant has to tell so many lies to make a profit. If he does not do so, there can be no profit. Sometimes a merchant says, "Oh, my dear customer, for you I am making no profit." But one should know that without profit the merchant cannot exist. Therefore it should be taken as a simple lie if a merchant says that he is not making a profit. But the merchant should not think that because he is engaged in an occupation in which the telling of lies is compulsory, he should give up his profession and pursue the profession of a Brahmana. That is not recommended. Whether one is a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, or a Shudra doesn't matter, if he serves by his work the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even Brahmanas who perform different types of sacrifice sometimes must kill animals, because sometimes animals are sacrificed in such ceremonies. Similarly, if a Kshatriya engaged in his own occupation kills an enemy, there is no sin incurred. In the 3rd chapter, these matters have been clearly and elaborately explained. Every man should work for the purpose of yajna, or for Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anything done for personal sense gratification is a cause of bondage. The conclusion is that everyone should be engaged according to the particular mode of nature he has acquired, and he should decide to work only to serve the supreme cause of the Supreme Lord. Text 48. Sahajam karma kunteya sadosham api natiyajit sarvaram hidoshana duminagnir ivavrita. Translation. Every endeavor is covered by some sort of fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore one should not give up the work which is born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. Purport. In conditioned life, all work is contaminated by the material modes of nature. Even if one is a Brahmana, he has to perform sacrifices in which animal killing is necessary. Similarly, a Kshatriya, however pious he may be, has to fight enemies. He cannot avoid it. Similarly, a merchant, however pious he may be, must sometimes hide his profit to stay in business, or he may sometimes have to do business on the black market. These things are necessary. One cannot avoid them. Similarly, even though a man is a Shudra serving a bad master, he has to carry out the order of the master, even though it should not be done. Despite these flaws, one should continue to carry out his prescribed duties, for they are born out of his own nature. A very nice example is given herein. Although fire is pure, still there is smoke, yet smoke does not make the fire impure. Even though there is smoke in the fire, fire is still considered to be the purest of all elements. If one prefers to give up the work of a Kshatriya and take up the occupation of a Brahmana, he is not assured that in the occupation of a Brahmana there are no unpleasant duties. One may then conclude that in the material world no one can be completely free from the contamination of material nature. This example of fire and smoke is very appropriate in this connection. When in winter time one takes a stone from the fire, sometimes smoke disturbs the eyes and other parts of the body, but still one must make use of the fire despite disturbing conditions. Similarly, one should not give up his natural occupation because there are some disturbing elements. Rather, one should be determined to serve the Supreme Lord by his occupational duty in Krishna consciousness. That is the perfectional point. When a particular type of occupation is performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, all the defects in that particular occupation are purified. When the results of work are purified, when connected with devotional service, one becomes perfect in seeing the self within, and that is self-realization. Text 49. Asakta buddhihi savatra jetatma vigata spriham neshkamya siddhim paramam sanyasena digachati. Translation. One can obtain the results of renunciation simply by self-control and by becoming unattached to material things and disregarding material enjoyments. That is the highest perfectional stage of renunciation. Purport. Real renunciation means that one should always think himself part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, he has no right to enjoy the results of his work. Since he is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, the results of his work must be enjoyed by the Supreme Lord. This is actually Krishna consciousness. The person acting in Krishna consciousness is really a sannyasi, one in the renounced order of life. By such mentality, one is satisfied because he is actually acting for the Supreme. Thus, he is not attached to anything material. He becomes accustomed to not taking pleasure in anything beyond the transcendental happiness derived from the service of the Lord. A sannyasi is supposed to be free from the reactions of his past activities, but a person who is in Krishna consciousness automatically attains this perfection without even accepting the so-called order of renunciation. This state of mind is called Yoga Rudra, or the perfectional stage of yoga, as confirmed in the 3rd chapter. Yastivatma rativasiyat. One who is satisfied in himself has no fear of any kind of reaction from his activity. Text 50. Siddhim prapto yata brahma tatapnoti devotame samasineva kunteya nishta janasya yapara. Translation. O son of Kunti, learn from me in brief how one can attain to the supreme perfectional stage, Brahman, by acting in the way which I shall now summarize. Purport. The Lord describes for Arjuna how one can achieve the highest perfectional stage simply by being engaged in his occupational duty, performing that duty for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One attains the supreme stage of Brahman simply by renouncing the result of his work for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. That is the process of self-realization. Actual perfection of knowledge is in attaining pure Krishna consciousness. That is described in the following verses. Text 51 through 53. Buddhiya vishuddhaya yukto Dhrityatmanam niyamya cha shabdanin vishayam stiyaktiva pragadivisha viyudasya cha vivikta seviva kivasi yatabatvaya manasa dhyana yoga paronityam virakyam samupashritam ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodam parigraham vimuchya nirmama shanto brahma bhuyaya kapate. Translation: being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place, who eats little and who controls the body and the tongue, and is always in trance and is detached, who is without false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and who does not accept material things, such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. Purport: when one is purified by knowledge, he keeps himself in the mode of goodness. Thus one becomes the controller of the mind and is always in trance. Because he is not attached to the objects of sense gratification, he does not eat more than what he requires, and he controls the activities of his body and mind. He has no false ego because he does not accept the body as himself, nor has he a desire to make the body fat and strong by accepting so many material things. Because he has no bodily concept of life, he is not falsely proud. He is satisfied with everything that is offered to him by the grace of the Lord, and he is never angry in the absence of sense gratification, nor does he endeavor to acquire sense objects. Thus, when he is completely free from false ego, he becomes non-attached to all material things, and that is the stage of self-realization, a Brahman. That stage is called the Brahma Buddha stage. When one is free from the material conception of life, he becomes peaceful and cannot be agitated. Text 54. Brahma Buddha prasanatma na shojati na kankashati samaha saveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim bhavate param.